back, ladies and gentlemen, to another, actually our first episode back from the dead, it seems like. No, but our first episode in St. Louis. So we have a super special show tonight, a great guest that's coming on. Unfortunately, Chad can't be here, and I know he feels bad about it, and if he doesn't, well, he absolutely should. That son of a... Anyway... But moving right along, our guest tonight is the one, the only, Dr. Michael Schmid. Doctor, welcome.
Hey.
Hey. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Are you a doctor of?
I have a PhD in public policy analysis and administration from St. Louis University here in St. Louis, Missouri.
Excellent. So what does that mean to the normal person like me?
So public policy is a subfield of political science. It's a more applied dimension of political science where we focus on assessing, interpreting, formulating policies for all forms of government, whether it's federal, state, local. It could be in the transportation domain. It could be defense. It could be foreign policy, health policy. It's a hyper-specialized field even within just public policy and within political science. Policy interpretation, formulation analysis, policy maintenance, implementation, those are all areas that policy scientists, policy analysts work in.
Well, now that we've lost our two listeners after all that, no, I'm just kidding. So you had an awesome opportunity. You got to work on a very interesting commission. And that was we were just talking earlier, it's been 19 freaking years, right?
Yeah, well, in September of 2019, it'll be 20 years.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have probably even forgotten at this point what it is that we were talking about. So the Waco, the whole Branch Davidian, there was a guy named David Koresh, correct?
Yes.
Who was, in my words, not yours, batshit crazy.
Okay.
Not Mike's words, mine. And if I'm not mistaken, he thought he was kind of the second coming of Christ.
Yeah, he counted himself as a Messiah.
So apparently, and this is why I'm glad you're here, because I can't speak to the super specifics about it, but I know it was a kind of a cultish environment, correct?
Cult is one of those words that the government and our office tried not to use. We strayed from using the word cult. I mean, the Branch Davidian religious sect was a branch off of the Seventh-day Adventists, which are a popular Protestant denomination in the South and South Central United States. I believe there's some in Florida too, but bring the microphone closer to me. And so the Branch Davidians are a subset or a break off of the Seventh-day Adventists, and they had a very specific set of beliefs, some of which were, in my personal opinion, pretty extreme.
So what were some of their beliefs? Because, you're Catholic, right?
I am. I'm Roman Catholic.
So what were some of their beliefs that you thought were kind of extreme? Because keep in mind that the people listening to this podcast, I do have some younger folks that listen that may not know the whole background, the story behind it.
Well, I mean, the history really goes back to the 1960s. And I don't want to really go all the way back into that. But at some point in the early 1980s, a guy named Vernon Howell came into the picture with the Branch Davidians and took over during a period of time when their former leader was getting older and looking for a successor, and he eventually died at some point, I think in the 80s I think it was the 80s. And so he took over. He renamed himself David Koresh, David being a biblical name, Koresh having also a biblical significance. And he he began to really kind of build up their complex. And again, they call it the Branch Davidian compound. Mount Carmel is what it was called. In the government, at that time, we strayed from calling it a compound. So again, another word that connoted, kind of negative meaning. So the complex there near Waco, Texas, wasn't in Waco. It was outside of town a little bit. I've been there. And he was, a preacher.
So let's dive right into the meat of it. What got him in trouble with the government? Well,
a couple of things. At first, it was run-ins that he was having in Tarrant County down there in Texas with local law enforcement. He was known to local law enforcement. The Branch Davidians, more or less, starting in the late 80s, started to sort of sequester themselves at Mount Carmel. And basically were living in residence there, fluctuating anywhere from 50 to 100 people. It was, in their view, not what I'm about to say, but it was more or less a polygamist type situation where men and their wives who became Branch Davidians would move in there, and the wives would become, quote, wives of David Koresh. And he, of course, had children with some of his wives and other women who were there that weren't otherwise married or engaged.
So he's just knocking fools up left and right.
Well,
again, my words, not yours.
He, and some of the females were younger too. They were not of age. Not that he was necessarily knocking them up, but he had sexual relations with younger girls that were 15, 16. I don't want to speculate, but I think the youngest may have been early teens.
Oh, Jesus.
But they also had, for God-loving and God-fearing people, peace-loving people, they had quite a cachet and business of guns. They would go to gun shows, buy and sell guns, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's part of our Constitution and, right to bear arms and all that. But the manner in which they were doing it got him in trouble with the ATF. So then it became sort of a federal issue in addition to some things that were going on locally within the county and in the state of Texas there. So the ATF really is the organization that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is really the organization that really started to lead an investigation into him and started to put together the pieces to serve a search warrant of Mount Carmel. It got to a point where David Koresh, he used to come in and have lunch at restaurants, or he'd be out and about in Waco. He'd come into town. Got to a point where he wasn't coming out as much. And actually, a federal agent actually infiltrated Mount Carmel and became a Branch Davidian as part of a cover.
Sneaky.
Again, well, it's all part of the public domain, but he did, and it's been covered in a lot of documentaries. But he was there. He was actually uncovered. And, here's the thing, people viewed David Koresh to be, like you said, crazy, but he really wasn't. He was a very savvy person who basically had the Bible memorized. He could go on and on, 1-2 day long sessions of preaching, interpreting the Bible for all the followers in Mount Carmel. And he's a brilliant guy. He was a smart guy. Pretty savvy, pretty street smart, resilient guy. So he stopped coming out. They figured out that this federal agent was in the compound, and At that point, we're getting into like February 1993. Significant period of time because on January 20th, 1993 was when President Clinton was sworn into office.
Boobies.
As the 42nd president. And the Attorney General position, which is a cabinet position, of course, President Clinton had some issue with getting his first Attorney General nominee, Zoe Baird, confirmed. It fell apart. So the reason I'm explaining all this is because it chewed up a lot of time through January and February of 1993. Meanwhile, like I said, federal law enforcement's doing their job. Local law enforcement's doing their job trying to structure a search warrant of Mount Carmel. And we're eating through February of 1993. So Janet Reno becomes the Attorney General finally in mid to late February 1993. And almost immediately, the infamous served search warrant of February 28th, 1993 occurred, where the ATF rolled up in body armor and cattle trailers and a bunch of huge vehicles. And
let me tell you what I remember about Janet Reno.
Okay.
Saturday Night Live skits.
Okay.
Oh, my God, they were so funny.
Well, God bless her. She passed away a couple years ago. Tough break to come into a job where that's what you're dealing with basically from day one. So the ATF went in there. They tried to execute the search warrant. Branch Davidians started firing at. They did not want the ATF in the compound. They warned them. They said, "Don't come in. That's not really how it works with the search warrant." And the Branch Davidians started firing at the ATF. ATF responded, and 4 ATF agents were killed on the 28th of February in 1993. So at that point, they roll back, and from that day forward, the 28th of February 1993 is when the 51-day standoff at the Branch Davidian complex started.
So what was your role in the whole commission? Am I even saying that right?
Well, no. So it's the Office of Special Counsel at the U.S. Department of Justice, and if the name Office of Special Counsel sounds, or Special Counsel sounds,
this is my show. Don't tell me I'm wrong.
If it sounds like a familiar term, it's because there's currently a special counsel. There's been 3 under the current statute that has been authorized as of 1999. The first one was our Office of Special Counsel Waco, led by former U.S. Senator from Missouri, Jack Danforth. That ran from September of 1999 through February of 2001. The second one was the U.S. Attorney from the Chicago area, Fitzgerald. He ran the second office, and he investigated the unmasking of Valerie Plame in 2005 and 6. Scooter Libby, all that stuff, Bush 43 administration. And then the current one, which is being run by Robert Mueller. And all very different subjects, but the purpose of a special counsel's office is to investigate the most serious criminal justice and national security issues in the United States that a traditional U.S. Attorney's Office or federal prosecutor or the regular Department of Justice isn't designed to do, shouldn't do, or has for some reason recused themselves. So that's very sparingly do they use the Office of Special Counsel to do that. Let me just say, prior to that, it was the independent counsel. Independent counsel was a little bit of a squishy thing because that ran from 1978 to 1999. And if you remember the term independent counsel, Ken Starr was the independent counsel in the 90s investigating Whitewater and the Clinton administration. And that was an investigation that sort of went everywhere. It went from land deals in Arkansas to spots on dresses and everything else, right? So when that when that statute expired, it was not reauthorized because that was an office. The independent counsel's office was a office that reported to Congress, and Congress is a political outfit. It's one of the three branches of our government, and depending on who's in Congress, it wasn't ideal at the time for them to reauthorize it. So they said, if we're going to reauthorize something like this, we're going to make it a special counsel and an independent counsel, and we're going to house it independently but still under the Department of Justice.
So why is this so important then, this special counsel? What does that mean to us as the average American citizen? Why? What's the big deal?
The idea is, now keep in mind I'm a PhD, I'm not an attorney. But,
sure. You're a hell of a lot smarter than I am.
But regardless, I mean, it is a policy. It is a decision. There is a thought process that goes into the implications of why you need something like this. It's important because when it comes to a law enforcement question, okay, now when we came into the show here, you called it the Waco Commission. So, there are things called commissions, right? There was the 9/11 Commission. There was the Warren Commission that investigated the JFK assassination. Those were not necessarily legal law enforcement investigations. Those were broadband, big picture, big panel inquiries into some phenomenon that happened in the United States that was so important, so disruptive, such a major focusing event in modern American life. Okay, when it comes, so that's a commission, right? So they use commissions for different reasons. Yes, there were things that happened. Illegal things happened when JFK was killed, but nobody knew what happens, right? So they chose a commission, the Warren Commission. And then, like I said, with 9/11, same thing. Certainly laws were violated for sure, but they chose the commission route instead of using a special counsel prosecutor or an independent counsel prosecutor to look into a specific set of facts or into a law enforcement phenomenon where it was so serious that it required an up or down decision on whether or not to prosecute people for something that happened, whether it was Waco, whether it was the unmasking of Valerie Plame, or whether it was Russia collusion with the Trump campaign, the question of that. So it's important because it requires so much time and dedication and focus and concentration and an aggregation of resources to do it. You can't just do it with a traditional U.S. Attorney's Office or, Main Justice in Washington, D.C. For example, in the case of Waco, why have it? And you have to think of the period of the 90s. So the period of the 90s was the militia culture, you had all these neo-Nazi groups. You had all these groups in the United States that sort of wanted to be off on their own away from the government, right? Which is fine. You're allowed to do things like that. But at the point you're breaking laws and the state or federal government has to get involved, and there is some kind of event that happens where people die, like for instance Ruby Ridge, when Mrs. Weaver was shot by the hostage rescue team, she died. There was.
I remember that.
Yeah, you had the Oklahoma City bombing, you had Waco, all these things in a couple of year period. So Ruby Ridge, Waco '93. Oklahoma City bombing, 95. All these things are happening, right?
What about the Olympic bombing?
Yeah, right, 96. So, all these things are happening. And it was getting to a point so these things don't just happen and, okay, it happened, it's a tragedy, maybe we'll investigate some people and...
They started seeing a bigger trend.
Well, what happened is Congress started to look into it. And Congress started having hearings, and they started saying, hey, what's going on here? Congress's job of all the federal agencies is oversight. So all the corresponding committees started to have hearings. They're looking, House Judiciary Committee and Senate Judiciary Committee and all the law enforcement committees, anything having to do with law enforcement, started looking at these things at Congress. And then you've got all these polls. This is when polling was huge in the 90s. You just remember Clinton couldn't make a decision without a poll. They used to say. Right. They used to say. So polls were so big in the 90s that
he made a lot of decisions with his own poll.
Yeah.
See, I'm screwing things up here because Mike's trying to be super serious. That's totally not me at all. For all the listeners, man, they're probably thinking already, man, what the fuck is wrong with Andy? Because he's normally a little more of a jackass. So.
Well, and everybody who knows me knows I'm probably too serious most of the time, right?
Well, not people that know you well.
Right.
Anyway, all right.
Okay.
Serious.
So anyway, and then you're starting to have mainstream news media and polls that are coming back with data that says, 50%, 60%, majority of Americans believe that the government acted improperly in some of these venues. Mm-hmm. Waco, for instance. Then revelations are being made, and it's in the Special Counsel Waco report, which is available online. You can Google it. It's there. It's 149 pages. It's actually a pretty interesting report to read. Every question that you have should be answered in there. I think it's a very well-written report. Revelation that, so it was a fire that burned down Waco, right?
Right.
Well, how did these people die? How did these 80 people and children die?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, it was revealed that the FBI fired pyrotechnic rounds into this building, tear gas rounds, which means they don't just go in there and release tear gas. They go in there. There's some sort of spark or combustion,
right?
And then the tear gas comes out.
There's a catalyst that causes the whatever OC, CS.
Yeah, and there's CS in there too. Small amount, which is cyanide, right? But it's a small amount. But anyway, so it was revealed that the pyrotechnic rounds were used, and so then people in Congress were like, and I've seen all the. I remember reviewing them when I was working on the Office of Special Counsel. All the public domain information, all the congressional hearings, I reviewed all that stuff, and so it was revealed that the FBI, which took over for the ATF, fired these pyrotechnic rounds. Mm-hmm. And so then you ask me, why do you need a special counsel? Why can't you just use a regular law enforcement agency to do that? Here's the problem: if you're the Department of Justice and the Department of Justice is the higher headquarters, so to speak, or the owning department of the FBI. And Department of Justice lawyers were involved in Waco, and FBI agents were involved in Waco, and there's questions about what the FBI and DOJ did. Mm-hmm. In terms of conflict of interest, can you really use the FBI and DOJ to investigate? Right.
You don't want cover-ups. You don't want there to be any inkling at all of a hint of a cover-up. You want it to be as fair as possible.
So that's why, that's why the special counsel is appointed and bracketed away from the main part of the Department of Justice and the FBI to do this. And in fact, we didn't use FBI agents on our special counsel inquiry because it was a huge conflict of interest in our special counsel, who negotiated his terms and his scope of investigation very carefully with the Department of Justice and the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General. It was that we're not going to use FBI agents. We can't. It's just, you can't run an investigation without. You're going to have scrutiny no matter what, but you can't run it and bring the FBI into something like that in this case and operate without scrutiny and have your findings be accepted.
So what exactly was your role then? What did you do specifically?
Okay. So I came on board. I was 22 years old. Just graduated from St. Louis U. I had studied, I was in the pre-law program there, studied sociology, criminal justice, and philosophy there. So, all solid. A lot of people study business and economics, but I studied those things. And I was thinking about going to law school, but I decided my last semester at SLU that I was not going to go straight to law school. I was going to take a year off, do some things I wanted to do out west, take kind of a gap year and just do that for a year and then go to law school. So so I actually interned for Senator Danforth in college and for another attorney named Tom Schweik. And so I was most of the way through my summer actually climbing out west and doing things I was doing out there. And my friend Tom, who was a good friend and mentor, he called me and he said, "Hey, we're finalizing the terms of our appointment for Senator Danforth to be special counsel. Would you like to come and work on this investigation?" And immediately in my mind, I abandoned my plans I'd already had 3 or 4 months of playing around out west. Mm-hmm. And I abandoned my plans, instantaneously at the opportunity to do something like this because I knew it was going to be very important and very interesting. Sure. And very challenging. So I came on board to answer your question, and I was sort of an executive assistant to the special counsel, the deputy special counsel, the chief of staff, and the director of investigative operations. And so, what does that mean? So at 22, you have no experience.
Got a lot of coffee.
Yeah, I mean, you have no experience, right? So you're the gopher, you're the scribe in meetings. I sat in on a lot of meetings with.
Some people would call that a bitch.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
So I sat in a lot of meetings with, people we had interviewed, and
you're never going to do this with me again, are you?
With folks that we had interviewed, met with forensic and scientific specialists that we had reviewing things, and so I got to do a lot of different things. I was not an attorney, I was not a federal investigator, but I got to kind of ride left seat, right seat with them, or right seat, I should say, with them for 18 months. And I worked real close with our director of investigative operations. I became very close with and learned a lot about how investigations are structured, the methodology, things like that. A lot of fundamental things I still use today that are just, it was just a great experience.
So I'm going to try to not be a jackass for a while and be serious for once, which is going to hurt, but I'll get through it.
It'll hurt you more than it hurts me.
Well, it definitely hurt me way more. But I have watched a couple documentaries on the whole Waco thing. And, correct me if I'm wrong because you actually worked it, but, some of them were kind of trying to hint at the fact that, yes, of course, obviously they used incendiary rounds, yeah, but that Koresh himself had his followers go through and dump gas through the compound.
I wouldn't say dump gas. That's they had lanterns, and yeah, they did have some fuel or accelerants that they used to light the fire. I mean, just to put it to rest, in case people listening to this wonder, so what's the so what? So who started it? Did the U.S. government start it or contribute to it, or was it the Branch Davidians? It was without a doubt the Branch Davidians. They had an apocalyptic, end of days outlook on life. They constantly referenced Babylon and a wall of fire that would protect them, from the Babylonians and things like that. And so, they definitely started the fire. A lot of them they shot each other inside the compound.
Children included?
That's the problem. And the report says that if you read it, the remains were so. The report says that the remains were so charred and codemangled, and some of them were baked because they had a concrete bunker there. Whether they shot children, I can't speak to that. You'd have to read the report, but yeah, I mean, I can tell you stuff I saw. I'm not going to go into specifics. I saw remains with bullet holes and stuff like that.
No matter what happened, just a huge, tremendous tragedy.
Yeah.
Regardless.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's horrible.
About 80 people. The report even says that it can't exactly enumerate the number of people because there were pregnant women in there. There were, it's just like it's hard. It's about 80 people.
That saddens me.
Yeah.
It really
does. A lot of kids
really
came out.
Saddens me.
I don't want to say a lot of kids, but several kids came out during the 51 days.
I guess you have to find the silver lining in everything, right? So that's a plus.
And they've interviewed a lot of those kids. I mean, some of these kids were little, 4, 5, 8, range, and 12, that range. And they've interviewed these kids since. They're now in their 20s and 30s, and there's just a huge volume of stuff on this. That's the other thing. Like, a lot of people have forgotten about Waco because, Ruby Ridge, Waco, Oklahoma City bombing, Olympic Park bombing. A lot of that stuff just went sort of passé, by the by, when September 11th happened. That took over the whole consciousness of major American-focusing events. So.
And let's not forget about the bombing of the first bombing of the World Trade Center.
Yeah, in 93.
Right.
Yeah.
So...
yeah, those were my high school years, right? So I was in high school from 91 to 95. Those were wild times, and a lot of stuff going on. And
listen, I got to tell you, you're a super smart dude, super smart, but not to the point where you're kind of a dork, but no more so than your average person. But you've. Some people think you're really serious, and you are serious when you need to be, right? And you've got some amazing stories, amazing connections. But I have gotten to know some of the true Mike.
Well, don't elaborate.
Yeah, I'm not going to. But anyway, my point being is, you and I have started to develop a really good friendship.
Yeah, we have, and that's why and that's the thing. People who are special counsel alums. Let me just tell you, how many people we have in the United States?
A lot.
320 million, something like that. I don't know. I'm not a census taker, but we have over 300 million people in the country, right? Fewer than, I'd estimate, 300 have worked as part of a special counsel office. So 75 were on my team, led by Jack Danforth. I don't know how many were on Fitzgerald's, but I don't think it was any larger than what we had. And the current one, led by Robert Mueller, I don't anticipate. I don't know what the size is, but I would say fewer than 300 people have worked on a special counsel inquiry, and so we don't. And the other thing is we don't talk about it really. Right. I mean, I haven't gone into really real details here, other than elaborating on what's out there already. But to your point, the reason I'm willing to do this is because I trust you.
Oh, you poor, foolish young man. Anyway, the reason I bring up the fact that you're a super smart guy and that you're a great guy is that, as usually happens with really great people, it seems like you lately have been struck with an incredible amount of tragedy. Mike's been recently. I'd like to. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let the cat out of the bag now.
Yeah.
I wanted to dedicate this podcast to Scotty Wirtz.
Yeah. Awesome guy. So
Scotty Wirtz, former Navy SEAL, was working for one of the letter agencies and unfortunately was killed in Syria by a suicide bomber. Just so happened to have been a classmate of Mike's in high school, and they were close. Let me tell you what I've seen Mike go through in the last couple of weeks. It's never easy to lose a friend. I know that personally. But Mike was running as second in command at his job, running that show. And not only that, but was in charge of putting together a lot, not all, but a lot of the coordination of the funeral and the events that led up to the funeral for Scotty. And my friend, I need to tell you, you did a great job.
Thanks, man.
You were still ugly as ever, but you did a great job. I didn't know Scotty personally, but from listening to the stories, it sounds like somebody I would have got along with great.
Yeah, he was hard not to like.
Yeah. So, hoo-yah to Scotty.
Yeah.
Long live the brotherhood.
Yeah.
Yep. Great dude. Enough buzzkill on that. But I want to dedicate this podcast to him. Moving right along, I'm going to tell a little story on you. Actually, I'm going to give a little something away. So, being the smart guy that he is, I have given Mike a good nickname.
Oh no.
Yeah. So, of course, I'm dating both of us by saying this because a lot of the younger generation probably doesn't get it now, but I have coined the nickname Rain Man because the dude's so freaking smart. Especially when it comes to St. Louis and St. Louis history and knowledge. You ask him anything and you get the time for Wapner. Definitely 500,000 million pieces of mosaic on the basilica. But
I guess I have to take that.
Yeah. Well, you don't have a choice, man. It's an offhanded compliment is what I'm trying to say. But, yeah, I mean, dude, you got so many different stories and cool things. And one of the landmarks, of St. Louis, especially downtown, is Charlie Gitto's, right?
Oh, yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about Charlie Gitto's? Because I'm probably not the person to speak to. I mean, it's like the place to be, one of the restaurants.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me just say, Mr. Charlie Gitto, who's going to be 87 this year, I believe. His birthday's 10 days. Here we go. Here's your Rain Man moment. His birthday's 10 days ahead of mine in July. So he's always been real special to me. He's basically like a grandfather to me. I didn't really get to grow up with my grandfathers. Both of them passed away when I was little, and so when I was in college interning at Bryan Cave Law Firm downtown, large international law firm in St. Louis, I used to take my meager intern wage and go down and, not masquerade as a lawyer, but masquerade as, a business person, I guess, or someone halfway respectable at Charlie Gitto. So you come Metropolitan Square Building in St. Louis. It's a 41-story building, huge building downtown, and we were up on the 30-something floor. Come down, go to Charlie Gitto's. That's when the business lunch culture was not really what it is today, where everybody seems to eat at their desk. But so you'd go out for lunch. You made time for lunch. You made it, an hour to get out the office with your, your friends and colleagues, whether you were fellow interns or fellow, I wasn't an attorney, but fellow attorneys. You go out there, you'd see everybody in Charlie Gitto's eating. Accountants, lawyers, doctors, news people, young silly kids like me. And, I started going there in the summer of 1996 when I interned at Bryan Cave, which is actually where I met Senator Jack Danforth and a few other attorneys, and Tom Schweik, who is very dear to me, who brought me onto Waco. And so I started eating there, and I forged a great relationship with Karen Gitto, who's Mr. Gitto's daughter, and her son, and Mr. Gitto himself. And I always loved Mr. Gitto because it's like he showed me the ropes of life. It's number one, he's this big restaurateur in St. Louis, very well known. Grew up on the Hill, which is the same neighborhood that Yogi Berra and Joe Garagiola come from, and just Stan Musial knew him, from the Cardinals. Like, he's been in the restaurant business, the Italian restaurant business, and the food industry in St. Louis for a long time. His dad was involved in it. Worked at Angelo's on the Hill back in the day in the 50s, and eventually started a really great restaurant on the Hill the Italian Hill in St. Louis. And then he had this little pasta house that he started in 1974 in downtown St. Louis on 6th Street. And since 1996, this has been my place. I mean, it's my place. Mm-hmm. It's the only restaurant I go to if I'm thinking I got a night out and I need to go eat. And number one choice is always Charlie Gitto's downtown. And that, by the way, that's where he hangs out too. He's got a few other restaurants. His son owns some restaurants, but that's where he hangs out. Mm-hmm. And so years and years and years and years go by. I got my commission in the Navy, which is, of course, where I met you. And when I got my commission, I was getting ready to leave to go to Pensacola for officer training. I had my going-away party there. And, I mean, he's just always such a character, I remember the first time he saw me in my Navy whites with my, my black shoulder boards and the gold stripe, ensign stripes on the shoulder. We were in the middle of my party, actually, and he walked into his restaurant and looked over at me with that missing a beat, total stone face. He looks at me and he goes, "Boy, do I outrank you." I'll never forget that the rest of my life. My friend Megan Kunkel was there. She's a fellow SLU grad. She used to work there back then. Now she's a great mom and has a couple of kids. But it's just a special place for me. And it really, I don't know, it was a place where I kind of learned how to deal with business people, and I just developed a lot in that restaurant. You don't think, a lot of interactions over the years.
Right.
A lot of late nights talking and eating and having a few drinks and whatnot, and it's just a special place to me.
I would say 90% of your learning does not occur in the classroom. Life lessons.
Yeah, theoretical, of course, isn't for me. I've learned a lot in the classroom, but
of course you have. You're a Rain Man.
But yeah, in terms of building relationships and those types of things.
Let me tell you, through you, fortunately, I have had the pleasure now of meeting Mr. Gitto and
a couple times.
Yeah, and what a character, man.
He's the best.
Oh, he's awesome. I love him.
Do you remember what he said to me last time we were there? And he held up the aspirin. He goes, we were sitting at the bar with him. He was on the kind of the back leg dog, at his spot.
Right.
Nobody else sits there but him. That's
right.
it. Don't even think about sitting in his chair. There's a brass plaque on the top of the bar. It says, this is the boss's chair. Nobody sits here but me. Well, anyway, we're sitting there having lunch, remember? Mm-hmm. And he looks over. He goes, "Hey, Mike." And we look over at him, remember?
Right.
And he's holding up 2 little white aspirin. Uh-huh. And he goes, "I'm about to take these aspirin because you give me a headache." And then he pops the aspirin.
He's an old school Italian,
Sicilian
guy.
Yeah, his family's from Messina, Sicily.
Just a fantastic gentleman that I would not want to piss off. If that makes sense. Mostly
out of respect.
Totally. And in fact, I gave him my shoulder patches.
Yeah, I remember.
And then the last time we went down there, I just got my patches in the mail yesterday, actually.
Yeah.
But the last time we went down there...
Now you won't be out of uniform.
Yeah, Charlie, Mr. Gitto is a prior sailor himself in the 50s.
He worked at Cecil Field down in Florida.
Yep. And so, of course, in true Mr. Gitto fashion, was busting my balls about being out of uniform. Mm-hmm. What a guy, man. Holy smokes.
He's the best. And his grandson, grandson, Louis Vangel, and his son-in-law, Jim Vangel, Louis' dad, along with Karen, Louis' mother, they're just fantastic people. I'd do anything for them. They're amazing, amazing people.
So I'm going to have Connie make some lumpia for him. Of course, Mr. Gitto's had it, but his grandson never.
He looked intrigued when you brought it up.
Yeah, his grandson has never had it. So
yeah. Well, he's a CBC cadet, and they're not particularly cultured.
Well, somebody has to go there, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's a great St. Louis reference.
Oh, man. That's the place, right? You go in for people who are not from St. Louis or have been to St. Louis but haven't been to Charlie Gitto's or somehow missed it if they've been to Charlie Gitto's downtown, go to the downtown location. You walk in, it's like a shotgun-style building, which that means basically, narrow restaurant, goes back, I don't know, mm-hmm. 80 feet or whatever, and 100 feet. And the walls are adorned with framed 8x10 photos of well-known St. Louisans, athletes, news people,
everybody.
Politicians,
Holy
going back
smokes.
to the 70s when they opened in 74. So, and just a lot of St. Louis memorabilia, but not overly so. It's not a museum. It's not. If you've been to Blueberry Hill in St. Louis, it's not like that. It's and Joe Edwards is a great guy too. I know Joe, but. It's not like displays or anything. It's just like an old school place that you can go and get amazing food and really kind of peruse the walls, and the people there are so friendly, and the
history alone is amazing.
Yeah.
So the big thing in St. Louis is, what high school did you go to?
Oh, Lord.
Nowhere else in the world that I've been at. I've been around the world a couple of times.
I know you have.
Nobody cares about that shit. But in St. Louis, the first question out of everybody's mouth is, what high school did you go to?
It's a parochial question, you know. St. Louis, you know, people say St. Louis is a very big, small town, right? So, like, you know, personally, my take on the whole where'd you go to high school thing, it's a socioeconomic indicator. You know, people ask that question, and what they really mean is, you know, what part of town did you come from? Were your parents wealthy or not wealthy? White collar, blue collar, you know, what color were you? All that kind of nonsense. So that's really what they're asking when they ask you where you went to high school, at least back in our day. Maybe not so much anymore, but
I don't know. I get asked that all the time still when I tell people that I'm from here. Although it's weird, though, because I have to get used to the fact of being back here, you know, and it's still like I'll walk around and it's so stupid. But I'll be in Walmart or a restaurant or somewhere. I'm like, oh, Connie, look, they got the blue. Oh, shit, never mind. We're in St. Louis. It doesn't matter, you know, or the Cardinals or whatever the case may be. But it's just so, I don't know. I have to adjust to being back. And, but I'm glad to be back. Yeah. Super happy to be back. It's time
to be back. You've done almost 30 years in the Navy. You served your country.
Yeah.
I think any St. Louisan would be proud to say, hey, man, we got Andy back because he's been going to the Philippines and to crazy Portsmouth Naval Hospital and everywhere else the last
let's not talk about that damn place.
30 years, you know, Balboa, you know, going through the jungles of the Philippines, all kinds of submarines under the ocean. You've done it all, brother.
It feels like I have, but it is good to be back. But the reason I bring up the whole high school thing is, you want to give a shout out to your school?
It's the only school.
Oh, Jesus, here we go.
De Smet Jesuit High School.
Uh-huh.
It's, another special place to me.
So moving right along. So I didn't realize this until Mike was telling me the other day that St. Louis is a huge, huge Catholic town.
Mm-hmm.
And we, when we were fortunate enough, or unfortunate enough, but to pay our respects to Scotty, we went to the Basilica.
The new Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis.
Man, that place is amazing.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe how huge it was, number one.
Yeah.
Huge, as Donald Trump would say.
It was bigly.
Yes, bigly. And would you like to have another Rain Man moment and talk about the ceilings?
What, about the mosaics?
Yes, the mosaics.
So it's supposed to be, people think it's the biggest mosaic. You know, the rector and the administrator guy there that we met. The rector. Yeah. He, you know, people think it's got an amazing mosaic collection, and it's supposed to be the biggest in the United States. And in the Western Hemisphere or the world. So it's been debated. And so as they told us, it's not the biggest. It's maybe the second largest after the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C.
But it hasn't been confirmed yet.
It hasn't been confirmed because that church is actually bigger, but it doesn't necessarily have more mosaic coverage.
Right.
You know, they might have some other things on the wall than mosaics. But I mean, as you know, from your experience when we walked into the Cathedral Basilica, from the second you walk in, it's mosaics from, you know, and what is a mosaic? It's little pieces of stained and colored glass that, you know, they're the size of, you know.
I was speechless for once, and that doesn't happen very often for me. I mean, I was truly amazed with the beauty of the place.
Yeah.
And the reception that we received from the staff there was amazing.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah.
They knew it was a tier 1 mission that we were working, so.
Absolutely.
And we graduated high school there too, Scotty and me, and my other classmates, 186 of us. So,
damn.
You know, last time, we were talking about it. Last time, all of us from my class were there was when we graduated, and now significant portion of us were back for Scotty's funeral mass, and it was pretty surreal.
30 years this year for me.
Yeah.
High school reunion.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Hey, man. Time marches on.
Doesn't feel like it. Doesn't feel like it at all. It feels like I'm still running around with my hair. Well, never mind. I don't have any hair. But, you know, if I had hair, it'd be on fire right about now.
But you don't look a day over 95.
Dick. So what do you like to do in your spare time? You kind of, You let the cat out of the bag, so I'm going to go back to it. You mentioned that you got commissioned in the Navy.
Yeah.
You're a supply corps officer. Mm-hmm. Most importantly.
Logistician.
Yeah. Most importantly, his toes are okay because he makes the lowly enlisted people kick the boxes instead. Mm-hmm. But most importantly, you have a very important job now as executive officer of the Reserve Center in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't do where the shit as a fucking XO, but I mean, he's a good guy.
Thank you.
That's going to reflect in my fear rep, isn't it?
Yeah, your listeners should know that I'm actually in your chop chain for your fitness report.
He's my boss, basically.
Yeah.
That's all right. Fuck it. I had a good run.
It doesn't matter now, right?
No, it really doesn't. What are you going to do? Shave my head, send me to sea?
Yeah.
Please?
No, it's good. So, yeah, I'm executive officer, XO of the Navy Reserve Forces here in St. Louis at a place called Navy Operational Support Center, St. Louis. We manage, as you know, about 650 selected reserve personnel who have jobs as, out in the region here and who do their Navy Reserve job. And we manage 22 units, and we do a bunch of other things, too, as you know.
I have worked for a lot of XOs over the years, as you could imagine.
Yeah. Tell people what the job of an XO is.
The XO is the hammer, right? Uh-huh. So the XO basically makes the command run.
Right.
The CO is ultimately responsible, but the XO makes the day-to-day operations happen. And Mike does exceptionally well at his job. But that's because some bitch has been in that same position for 20 years now?
No.
No?
No, it's
close.
Just been over 2.
It's bullshit.
No, it has been.
Well, you've been at the NOS, though, for how long?
3.5. I'm getting to the end, so.
Yeah, well, anyway, I'm not kissing his ass, as you could probably tell from the rest of the podcast, but he does a great job as the XO. Puts up with a lot of bullshit. And I'm trying to be a buffer for him, but he won't let me. Trying to be the bulldog. But it's probably a good thing he doesn't let me do it. I'd hurt a lot of people's feelings, I think. But anyway, man, I really appreciate you being on the show. Maybe shedding some light on the whole Waco thing. And I think it's important that we bring it back, because as we all know, if you don't study and know your history, you're bound to repeat it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Waco thing, the whole Waco phenomenon, it's just you could do like a podcast marathon and not get into all the details. It's so It's so involved. So,
but I know the government. You mentioned that the government was hesitant to call it a cult.
Yeah. Because they can't. I mean, they're American citizens, and cult is a pejorative term. It suggests that it's a deviant group of people, and you can't, as the government, say, hey, these people are worthwhile Christians or religious people, and this other group is not. I mean, you just can't do that. So that's why they don't use the word cult.
I'll use it. It was a damn cult.
Okay, if you say so.
I say so. Okay. But you know what? Whatever. Yeah. It's not like David Koresh is going to sue me. May come back from the grave and haunt me a little bit, but whatever.
You need some really strong smelling salts.
Yeah, that's right. But my reasoning for bringing that up is I'm starting to go down this road for the podcast of cults.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I'm very interested in it.
You must want to be on the air a lot.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to talk about, that's for sure. Unfortunately, before we left Virginia, I had lined up a guy that's a quote-unquote expert on cults. He's been on ABC, several other organizations. That's an expert on cults and how to not only how do people get sucked into that realm, but how to get them out. But unfortunately, we came and we left, or fortunately, however you want to see it. And I kind of lost contact with him. But I'm going to reach out and regain contact. Now, we work with somebody who said that he's going to come on the show, Brian, that's a former Jehovah's Witness. And so he's managed
That's not a cult, though.
Well, it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
He seems to think it is.
Okay.
So it's very interesting. From a medical standpoint, I've worked with, or not worked with, but I've had patients that have been Jehovah's Witness and refused certain treatments. And
well, that sounds like a Christian Scientist to me, not a Jehovah's Witness.
Similar.
Yeah.
Very similar.
I mean, I know a few Christian Scientists, too, and they're great people.
Mm-hmm. But, yeah, anyway, so that's kind of where we're going. And then once Chad comes back, I know Chad is very interested in this because, well, let him tell that story. It'll be, I don't want to steal his thunder. Listen, brother, it's been real. It's been fun. It's been awesome. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Now let's go talk some stuff that we can't talk about on the air.
Okay.
All right, brother. Hey, listen, everybody, thanks for joining in. Another MadSiss Productions podcast sponsored by Menahuni Soaps. And thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.